afternoon and welcome to this week's edition of Halftime Talk. I'm delighted to be joined by Rauf, Mammadov, founder and principal of the Eurasian Energy Chamber, and also a long-term employee, senior executive with SOCAR, Azerbaijan's national energy company. Rauf, good afternoon and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show.
Rauf, there's no other place to kick off than all things Russia and Ukraine, and obviously Azerbaijan as another of those countries that have sort of caught in that sphere and in that fragile place between where Russia intersects with the rest of the world, as we're seeing at the moment in Ukraine, can be a very turbulent place and even violent as it is at the moment in Ukraine. Thankfully, that has not impacted Azerbaijan at this time. But I wanted to get your sense about countries around. Obviously, Ukraine is a country in which a lot of gas passes through from Russia to the Western markets. What is your outlook for the other countries that surround Russia and the possible impact that they may have? Azerbaijan, a big exporter of energy, and the possibilities that any of that could be disrupted by this moment.
Well, yes, you touched very important points here. Geography is a fate for that part of the world, and Russia is the reality. It's a physical reality, and Russia as not just an ambitious state with goals of becoming global player, but Russia as also largest competitor of these countries, because most of these countries, especially the Azerbaijan and the Central Asian states, the oil and gas rich Central Asian states, who not only have to produce their resources, but also the most important and generally underestimated part, the logistical part of it, to supply their resources to the markets, to the global markets. And the situation further exacerbates with the fact that most of these countries are landlocked. The oil and gas rich countries are landlocked. They don't have access to oceans. Ironically, most of their oil and gas, especially in case of Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan, are coming from offshore. Also in Kazakhstan case, there is onshore as well, but they don't have direct access to the markets. Luckily for Azerbaijan, and also due their, I think, more prudent and smarter policy of diversifying their export outlets, Azerbaijan doesn't rely on Russia for export of their oil and gas to the markets. Kazakhstan, for instance, does, and that makes their situation more precarious than Azerbaijan's. Although so far we haven't seen any direct impact on Kazakhstan exports. Besides the fact that in some cases, their oil are blended with the Russian oil and the discounts applied to the Russian oil are applied to their oil as well. So besides that, there hasn't been any physical interruptions to the exports.
Well, that's not an insignificant hit, is it? When you consider that Urals are trading at anything to $30 to $40 discount on Brent. If your barrel of Kazakhstani oil is caught in that same price point, you're hurting.
Not all of their oil is being impacted at the moment. Also, you have to consider that they also export gas to China, and that's more direct, non-Russian actually transit. And also you have to, I mean, it's more relative, right? It's the oil price has been hovering around 65 to 75, that sweet spot for last 3 years, last 4 years already. Now we're talking about 130s and then 110s, and even discount with that is not as hurtful as it was before. And also you have to consider that the oil prices went negative in 2020 when the COVID.
Yes.
So it's bad, but it's not that bad. It's more important, I think, for the markets, and for also especially important for these countries, is that physical supply hasn't been disrupted. bear in mind, in Azerbaijan's case, there was only one case when the exports through the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, which is the main export pipeline for Azerbaijan's oil, and also for some Kazakhstani oils in minor volumes, but some Kazakhstani oil as well. The only time that it was physically disrupted, what happened in 2008 during Russian invasion to Georgia. So there is that similarity, and there is that foreboding that, you know, when things get heated, when things are when there is more attention paid to certain parts of the world, sometimes physical events happen in some other parts of the world. In that case, it happened in Turkey, and the real reason of the explosion is still unknown, but it did happen throughout the war and during that short period of escalation through the war. So the threat is always there, the risk always there, and the fact that for the last 20 some days that the war has taken place, none of these disruptions happened, I think it's a great deal. But overall, any escalation of tensions between Russia and the West puts these countries under huge stress, because most of these countries are opting for a more balanced approach, because, as I said before, Russia is reality, and these countries has been part of Russian empire in forms of monarchy, or as the Soviet Union, you know, controlled by Moscow for in total for two generations, for 200 years, in, you know, the pre-Soviet and after Soviet. So there is that always threat that, you know, this can happen to them, and this.
Well, as we see a more adventurous Moscow, Putin has clearly sort of stepped up a level. Of course, we've had Georgia, we've had Crimea, we've had other examples of the sort of reassertion of Soviet ambitions, which Putin has been quite public about in terms of his vision. And now we're seeing it quite violently taking place in Ukraine, not a very large country in the context of former Soviet states. I mean, it's akin to Kazakhstan from a scale point of view. This is Russia really flexing its muscles. How does that resonate, do you think, in the Central Asian countries? The sort of unbelievable is happening.
I think if you're sitting in capitals of any of these countries, you should really be worried about unprecedented behavior of your neighbor, who had a tendency of occupying you in every single century, you know, for the last, as they have been strong. So once Russia, there's always fear in these capitals when Russia thinks that it's strong. You know, Russia have attacked these countries not always when they were consolidated and they were strong. I mean, go back to the history. I mean, during the Bolshevik time, there wasn't a strong consolidated power. But when Russia thinks that they're strong, that's probably the most dangerous part. And now Russia thinks or wants to impose its strength on neighboring Ukraine. So it's the threat is there, the risk is there. Of course, these countries have tried to also balance, in Kazakhstan's case, between Russia and China, and, you know, between other superpowers. In Azerbaijan's case, maybe not a superpower, but the regionally, Azerbaijan has treaties with Turkey, which stipulates that in case of the intervention or invasion to the sovereignty of Azerbaijan, Turkey, that the clause in the treaty is triggered and Turkey can interfere. So there are some mechanisms or policies, foreign policy of these countries are trying to balance. But in terms of the fear, in terms of the threat, I'm pretty sure it's there. And every single leader in these countries are extremely interested in this crisis to be soon over.
They can join the rest of the world on that, I'm sure, but they have obviously more at stake than others. But everybody says to have something at stake at this stage. If you look at this moment in history, Rauf, the idea that we saw in the 1970s, 50 years ago, with the oil crisis of 1973, 74, the OPEC embargo on the West, and the creation of the IEA, and the creation of much more efficient fuel car consumption, and then the structural change to the energy markets, attempts for energy independence in the US and so forth. I'm wondering at this point, how big a structural change do you think this will be? We have a world in which there's a lot of pipelines flowing from the East into Europe. Now we've got Europe. Just yesterday, we had the German delegation in Qatar trying to do a deal around natural gas. We had a German delegation in Abu Dhabi trying to do a deal around hydrogen. There's the idea that the big shifts and all of this infrastructure, including, let's say, Azerbaijan's pipeline to Ceyhan, or Kazakhstan's pipeline through Russia, which were built for a different time. Will this be a structural shift, do you think, or how big of a one is this moment comparative to 73, 74?
The analogy is great. I think 79 is usually forgotten, but I mean, the shock of 79 actually supersedes any other shock with the Iranian revolution. But one quick note: the structural shift has started long time ago. The structural shift within the energy industry, where the industry is slowly but surely moving towards non-fossil fuel production, non-fossil fuel energy portfolios. What's happening in the world at the moment is symptomatic, first of all, of how important it is, not only from climate change perspective, but also from the perspective that most of the some of the main oil and gas exporter countries in the world are not generally aligned with the free market idea, with the system, Western-based system, with the dollar-based system. They're the constitution of the power in the world, of the polarization in the world, of the status of affairs in the world. So we first of all, we saw that structural change happening. What accelerated the process was that non-OPEC countries have surpassed, in the first time for the last 50 years, has surpassed the production of the OPEC countries. That was the first signal that the shift has already started, and the response to that was the OPEC Plus, was when the OPEC leadership by Saudi Arabia and the UAE understood that zero-sum approach in respect to the other producers, especially in the case of Russia, would be shooting yourself on your foot, and they have joined their forces to create actually bigger cartels. So that was the first symptom of the structural shift within the oil market, and this is already happening within the general structural shift within the energy. When, as I said before, we are moving from the fossil fuels to non-fossil fuels. So it was already a complicated time. Ukraine crisis has, first of all, brought all these issues to the core and center of the global agenda. As you know, we have been talking about the looming energy crisis, especially the supply chain crisis, even before the war. I think in this, we're living in a very precarious times in terms of the energy markets. We're right now, the numbers are showing around 1 million barrel of Russian oil to be taken off the market because of the sanctions for next month, and then this number can go up to 3.5 million barrels. That means that
if we take that sort of immediate sense of this crisis, we talked about it in the context of a big wheel of time, we shrink it right down to the present and the coming, or at the end of the first quarter now, we've already seen oil prices spike above nearly to 140 on Brent, back down to 100, now on an upward trend again. Where do you think this goes in the second quarter?
It will depend, first of all, on how the war will evolve. If war continues and another package of sanctions are rolled out, and I think the fifth wave is already coming, we will see the US and the EU having no choice but choke the main source of income for Russia, the oil and gas, as much as possible. I'm not talking about cutting or sanctioning the exports abruptly, but that will, the process is showing that there will be some attempt to impact Russian exports. And the initial studies are showing, as I said before, that we're expecting 3.5 million barrels of oil taken off the market, Russian oil taken off the market, which is a big number to offset. So far, the pattern of behavior from the OPEC Plus, which is Russia is actually leading member of, has shown that they're not rushing to soothe the markets, at least with the statements. Actually, their statements have been counter market in terms of their negative impact to the market. And so if with the physical deficit of at least 3.5 million barrels, and now we're talking about we're talking only about the geopolitical vacuum. We're assuming that nothing else will happen from other producing states. And also we're talking about the demand as well, whether the war in Ukraine will impact the demand, and the demand will be decreased as well, which usually happens when this kind of shocks take place. But all the things same, 3.5 million barrels of Russian oil off the market will be a shock for the market. And today, Saudi Arabia made an announcement that they're not responsible for balancing the market because of the Houthis attacks on their infrastructure. So they're basically relinquishing the responsibility from idea of possibility of pumping more barrels because of the physical constraints that they're giving. So we're expecting.
They don't seem to be in a very good mood. The relationship between Saudi and US seems to be not in a very good place at this moment in order to come to some agreement around supporting a global effort to increase supply.
Yeah, and given the fact that they've been hurt in 2020 because of the COVID, because most of their oil and gas incomes were hurt as well, they're also maximizing the profit from the situation. As cynical as it may sound, but they're benefiting. They're trying to do best for their.
Would we expect? I mean, that's quite. If you take the 3.5 million barrels of Russian oil that could be closed in during the second quarter, combined with the fact that OPEC Plus is already deficient by about 1 million barrels a day from their own agreement that they're not meeting, that's a lot of supply shortage. If you have demand continuing, there's $200 oil.
I mean, if I knew that, I would be probably billionaire.
I mean, everything seems to be counterintuitive these days. Yeah. It's no longer 1 and 1 is no longer 2, right? I mean, along comes Iran next week and says, here's 100 million barrels of floating storage, bang, right on the market.
Again, it's very hard to predict that number, but Iran's yes, that capacity can be effective. But just to put it in context, the world gallops 100 million barrels a day. Even with Iran's, of course, the positive signals is always good for the market. You know, this market is oil and gas market is largely built on the expectations, and that's why, as I said before, the OPEC Plus's stance posturing throughout this crisis is so important. And as I said, they've been very not really supportive of the of the price decrease for the obvious reasons.
Well, you wonder what that means vis-a-vis, because ultimately China is their most important customer, and China won't be very comfortable with prices this level, or all commodities at record levels with inflation soaring. That's very unstable for China.
Yes, and China is also important for Saudi Arabia as the primary market, especially given the ongoing relations, as you mentioned, between the United States and the Saudi Arabia. And also you have to consider the fact that in the long run, Saudi Arabia is also interested in outcompeting Russia in Chinese market, in very valuable Chinese market. So it's a long game for Saudi Arabia as well, to see Russia weakening, Russia unable of investing in its oil and gas production, which mainly the new resources will be coming from East Siberia, and with the lack of financial resources, I don't see these projects being executed as in the time frame that it was planned. Most of these Russian projects are state subsidized, or they're taking place with European technology together with the Chinese or Japanese investments. So for Saudi Arabia, seeing less production coming in the long run from Russia is also a win. It's also, they're trying to, but they're also trying to, there will be some modus operandi between China and Saudi Arabia in respect to the oil prices. There has to be in a reasonable, range for China as well.
I suppose China could pick up these sanction or these barrels of Russian oil that are not going to Europe anymore. That 3 million that could be knocked out. China could see themselves actually enjoying a period of very discounted Russian oil.
Yeah, which was their modus operandi in respect to Iran throughout the post JCPOA period up until now. China was the only reason why Iran survived, and because they were permitted to export around 500,000 barrels, and the only customer for their oil was China. So I don't see any reason of seeing the same pattern in respect to Russia as well, especially given the fact that Russia has the borders with China. There is East Siberian export outlets which allow Russia to export their oil and gas to China. So China will definitely take as much as benefit from this, from comparatively cheaper oil prices, because Russia basically doesn't have any other options besides China.
You mentioned earlier about how important China has become for Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, and that some of these trends were already in place before this war in Ukraine. There was a growing narrative of a China-US Cold War and a US kind of withdrawal from the Middle East. I'm wondering, how do you see China's relationship and its stance on the Russian invasion impacting its future ties with Russia, or with Washington, and consequently with the Middle East?
I think China is implementing that golden rule of divide and rule, divided impera in this situation. It's in best interest of China to see the Gulf states clearly becoming more independent and leaving the United States orbit, the West orbit, and diversifying their geopolitical hedges between the West and the East. It's great news for China, and they're taking full advantage of it. This is further supported with the inherent interdependence between China as a buyer of oil and gas resources from the Gulf, and the Gulf as an exporter of these resources. So we will see this trend.
Doesn't that miss one critical point, that Washington provides the energy security for both of them? That without the Washington Fifth Fleet sitting in the Gulf, China's oil and energy could be under threat. I mean, this is a very important security blanket that America provides China.
Yes, but that's also that also demonstrates the nature of the oil and gas market, the global oil and gas market, how interdependent it is. When we look at the oil market, and actually the Russian situation is a clear example. It will be on probably for an average person who doesn't understand the energy geopolitics would say that why wouldn't we ban Russian exports, because that way we will deprive them from the main income of. But when that happens, the reverberation, the implication of the oil and gas market, the price hike for every single citizen in the world would be actually more problematic than the current situation. So that the same applies for the China as well, for the Chinese oil imports as well. The importance of running of this organism, of the mechanism of the oil and gas market running smoothly and becoming as globalized as possible is much more important for the whole world, for the world economy, than trying to punish China or a certain country for taking advantage of this system. So I think that's...
So why should American taxpayers have the burden to provide that to the world and not China contribute to paying for that security of energy supply coming out of the Middle East, for example? Because that's one of the big questions for this sort of so-called US withdrawal from the Middle East, that the Middle East oil producers are going to have to consider who's going to provide the security blanket.
I think that and many other issues should be a big concern in the mid to long run for the Gulf countries. The attitude of the Gulf states throughout this Ukraine crisis, to me, it was expected, as I've been looking into Russian and the Gulf rapprochement for last maybe 6-7 years. I knew that in case of the escalation, it will be a litmus test for these countries to show their allegiance, or actually to position themselves in the best way. So far, I've been disappointed in their behavior, not only from the West perspective, but also I think they could have done better. I think in the long run, they have to think about their relations with the West, especially with Washington and the Brussels, and that topic, why the American taxpayers should pay for the security of the international shipping, oil shipping, must become an important issue in the agenda in Washington, D.C. But that's for the people of the United States to decide.
Well, let's just wrap up on that sort of tangential subject there. We've been waiting, like expecting parents for this Iran nuclear deal to be born again for the second time. Do you think it will be, or is this a done deal? What does it feel like in Washington, and what will be the ramifications if it goes ahead?
I think it's a game changer, but I think it's a game changer that has been expected for last as soon as the Biden administration came to power. I think it's a bad deja vu for the Gulf states who had gone through this during the Obama administrations. It was less expected back then because United States kept Gulf states in dark throughout the process. This was inevitable throughout the second process, and I think the JCPOA, the first deal, was an eye opener for the Gulf states when they actually started to hedging their bets, and that will change the whole dynamics within the Middle East. There will be more alignment and more regrouping, reconfiguration along the trying to adjust to the new realities of the Middle East, where Iran will become a bigger player, and with I think, as a side note, Russia and Iran will exchange with the places. Russia will be more sanctioned at the moment, and Iran will be less sanctioned and more contributive to the market. So we will see that in terms of the attitude towards the market as well.
But you wonder if the sum of that parts will all add up to being the same amount of oil coming onto the markets by the time we get deep into the second quarter. And so maybe those Russian barrels won't be missed as much as they feel at the moment. We must wrap it up there, Rauf. We could talk all day. It's so amazing to hear your insights. I really appreciate it. Rauf Mammadov, founder and principal of the Eurasian Energy Chamber, formerly with the Azerbaijan National Energy Company of SOCAR. Thank you for being on Halftime Talk this week.
Thank you. Thank you very much.